All right, so you really threw us a curveball with this one, giving us the State of the Union and response from February 6th, 2025.
Oh.
President Trump's second term. We're
Yes.
talking his fifth State of the Union.
Fifth one.
With Senator Melissa Slotkin offering the rebuttal, and
Yeah.
clearly you want to cut through all the noise and see what's really going on beneath the surface here.
Yeah, these speeches are always more than just a rundown of accomplishments or a to-do list.
Right.
They're carefully crafted narratives, each one trying to shape how you see the country and its future.
Exactly, and the contrast between Trump's address and Slotkin's response.
Yeah.
It's pretty stark. Take the economy, for example.
Yeah.
Trump paints this picture of a roaring economic engine, claiming America's never been better.
Right.
Meanwhile, Slotkin's arguing that folks are struggling, costs are sky high, and Trump's policies are actually making things worse, not better.
It's a classic case of dueling narratives.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see how they use specific policy examples to bolster their arguments. Trump leans heavily on the familiar trifecta of tax cuts, tariffs, and deregulation. He touts things like, a booming stock market, a record low number of illegal border crossings.
Right.
He even weaves in, personal stories to drive his points home, like the case of Peyton McNabb, a high school athlete who was injured competing against a transgender athlete.
Yeah.
This story underpins his push for banning transgender women from women's sports, a move sure to resonate with his base.
But then he goes and throws a curveball.
Yeah.
With this $5 million gold card for immigrants.
Right.
I mean, that seems to clash with his usual hardline stance, doesn't it?
On the surface, yes.
Yeah.
It might seem contradictory, but if we dig a little deeper, we see a shrewd political calculation at play.
Okay.
This gold card does a couple of things simultaneously. It potentially softens his image on immigration just enough to attract moderate voters, while still appealing to his base with the high price tag, signaling that only the right kind of immigrant would be able to afford entry. And of course, let's not forget the potential revenue stream for the government.
Oh, yeah.
This is classic Trump, multi-layered, playing to different audiences and never shying away from a bit of controversy.
Now, Slotkin takes a completely different tack, focusing on bringing down costs for everyday Americans.
Right.
She's hitting hard on the need to support the middle class, arguing that Trump's policies, particularly the tax cuts, primarily benefit the wealthy, all while potentially gutting social safety nets.
She even suggests that Trump might gut retirement benefits to fund his agenda.
Wow.
It's a bold claim, and whether you believe it or not, it does raise a crucial question: whose vision of the economy resonates more with you?
Right.
And how do you think these competing narratives will play out in the upcoming elections?
Yeah.
We've seen how economic anxiety can sway voters, and both Trump and Slotkin are clearly tapping into that, albeit in very different ways.
Moving on from the economic battleground, we see both speeches tackle the hot-button issue of immigration.
Yeah.
But with very different tones.
Absolutely. Trump, unsurprisingly, doubles down on his hardline stance.
Right.
His focus is unwavering crime deportation and a fortified border. And he pulls no punches when it comes to stirring emotion.
Yeah.
He shares the heart-wrenching story of Alexis Neri, whose 12-year-old daughter was tragically murdered,
Oh, wow.
the alleged perpetrator, an undocumented immigrant. This kind of storytelling allows Trump to bypass complex policy debates and connect directly with raw emotion,
Right.
bolstering his call for stricter border control.
Then there's that bombshell announcement.
Yeah.
Trump declaring he's reclaiming the Panama Canal, citing a past agreement violation.
Wow.
He claims the canal built with American blood and sweat was unfairly given away, and he's taking it back. Talk about shaking things up.
It's a power move, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But it's not just a symbolic gesture.
Right.
We have to think about the potential ramifications.
Yeah.
This could have significant economic consequences, disrupting global trade routes.
Oh, yeah.
Legally, there are bound to be challenges. Treaties don't just disappear overnight.
Right.
And geopolitically, this is a major provocation. How will Panama react? What about other Latin American countries? This single announcement could trigger a cascade of events reshaping the global landscape.
It definitely screams America first and shows Trump isn't afraid to flex his muscles on the world stage, even if it ruffles some feathers.
Now, in stark contrast, Slotkin calls for a more functional immigration system. While agreeing on the need for border security, she frames it as just one piece of a much larger puzzle.
Okay.
For her, we're not dealing with a border problem, but rather a system problem. We need to address the root causes of migration, not just the symptoms.
Right.
This goes beyond simply building walls and deporting people. It means grappling with complex issues like poverty, violence, and climate change in the countries sending migrants northward. It's a much broader, more nuanced perspective.
So we're seeing a classic dichotomy here, enforcement versus reform. Two fundamentally different approaches to a complex issue, and each will resonate with different segments of the population. This begs the question, where do you stand on this spectrum? Are you more aligned with the enforcement-focused approach, or do you see the need for systemic reform? And how do you think these differing approaches will play out in the lives of immigrants and the future of the nation as a whole?
Yeah.
It's a question that will continue to dominate the political landscape for years to come.
Absolutely. It's interesting, isn't it? Even though Trump and Slotkin have these vastly different approaches, they both seem to be tapping into this shared sense of anxiety about the future.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're speaking to two different versions of America, each with its own set of fears and hopes.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
It's like they're acknowledging this underlying unease, this sense that things aren't quite right, but they're offering very different diagnoses and prescriptions.
Exactly. On the one hand, you have Trump supporters who seem drawn to his message of strength and his promise to restore America to some perceived past glory. They're worried about things like economic insecurity, the erosion of traditional values, and the decline of American power on the world stage.
And Trump leans right into those fears, doesn't he?
Yeah,
He paints this picture of America under siege,
he does.
constantly threatened by forces, both foreign and domestic illegal immigrants, terrorists, woke liberals, China. They all become part of this narrative of a nation in decline.
Yeah.
And his solution is always the same.
Hmm.
A return to strength, aggressive action, a reassertion of American dominance.
It's a powerful message, especially for those who feel like they've been left behind or ignored by the forces of change.
Right.
But it's also a message that can be divisive and dangerous.
On the other side, you have Slotkin supporters who seem to represent a more diverse,
Right.
more globally minded America.
Yeah.
They're looking for a leader who can bridge divides, not deepen them. Someone who understands the complexities of a rapidly changing world.
Their concerns are different, too. They're more likely to worry about things like climate change, income inequality, the erosion of democratic norms.
Right.
They're not looking for a return to some mythical past, but rather a path forward, a way to navigate the challenges of the 21st century.
And it's interesting how both speakers use personal stories to try to connect with their audiences. Trump talks about the families of crime victims,
Right.
people whose lives have been tragically impacted by illegal immigration.
Right.
Slotkin shares stories of everyday Americans struggling to make ends meet, families crushed by the rising cost of health care.
It's a classic rhetorical technique.
Yeah.
Putting a human face on these complex policy issues.
Right.
It allows listeners to connect emotionally with the message, to see how these abstract debates actually impact real lives.
But it also raises some questions, doesn't it?
It does.
How are those stories being chosen and presented?
Yeah.
Are they being used fairly and accurately, or are they being manipulated to evoke a particular emotional response and push a specific agenda?
Those are questions we should always be asking ourselves, especially in the age of social media,
Right.
where information and misinformation spreads so quickly, right? It's easy to get swept up in the emotion of a story, but we also need to be critical thinkers.
Yeah.
We need to look at the evidence,
Yeah,
consider multiple perspectives, and avoid jumping to conclusions.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not just about being informed, it's about being engaged. It's about recognizing that we're not just passive consumers of information, we're citizens with a responsibility to participate in the political process
Right.
in a thoughtful and informed way.
Speaking of being informed,
Yes.
Trump laid out some pretty specific policy proposals in his speech. Things like tax cuts, infrastructure, spending a new missile defense system.
Yeah.
There was even that eyebrow-raising announcement about reclaiming the Panama Canal. It's a lot to unpack.
And it's important to note that many of these proposals are likely to be highly controversial both domestically and internationally.
Right.
Take the tax cuts, for example. They'll almost certainly be criticized for disproportionately benefiting the wealthy while doing little to address income inequality.
Right.
The missile defense system, while potentially appealing to those concerned about national security.
Could also be seen as provocative and destabilizing escalating tensions with other countries.
Yeah.
And as we've already discussed, reclaiming the Panama Canal is a major geopolitical gamble
Oh, yeah.
that could have far-reaching consequences.
So where does all of this leave us?
Well,
What are the key takeaways, and what should we be paying attention to as this all plays out?
I think it's clear that the political divide in America is deeper than ever.
Yeah.
These two speeches offer a glimpse into the competing visions for the future that are fueling that divide.
Yeah.
And as we head into the next election cycle, it's crucial to pay attention to how these visions are evolving and how they're resonating with voters.
What are some of the key issues that you think will be front and center in the coming months and years?
Well, the economy will undoubtedly be a major battleground.
Right.
We need to watch how Trump's policies actually impact job growth, wages, and the cost of living.
Yeah.
Will his America First approach lead to genuine economic prosperity, as he claims, or will it result in greater isolation and decline? That's a question voters will be asking themselves.
And then there's the immigration. Can Trump really deliver on his promise to secure the border and deport millions of undocumented immigrants?
Right.
And what would be the human and economic costs of such a policy?
And on the global stage, how will Trump navigate the increasingly complex challenges of a rapidly changing world? Will his America First approach lead to greater conflict and instability, or can he somehow leverage American power to achieve a more peaceful and prosperous world?
And let's not forget about the ongoing culture wars.
Yeah.
These battles over social values aren't going away anytime soon. They're going to continue to impact everything from education and healthcare to free speech and religious freedom.
And underlying all of this is a fundamental question about the future of American democracy itself. Can our democratic institutions withstand the pressures of polarization, misinformation, and the erosion of trust? Or are we headed for a period of greater instability and uncertainty?
These are big, weighty questions,
They are.
and there are no easy answers.
Yeah.
But they're questions that we as citizens need to be grappling with.
Absolutely.
We need to be engaged, informed, and willing to participate in the difficult conversations that will shape our nation's future.
You know, one thing that really struck me was the lack of attention given to the climate crisis in both speeches.
Oh, yeah.
It's almost as if they're both operating in a world where this existential threat doesn't exist.
It's a glaring omission, isn't it?
It is.
Especially given the increasing urgency of the situation. Scientists are warning that we have a limited window of opportunity to avert catastrophic climate change.
Right.
Yet, neither speaker seemed to be prioritizing this issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like they're both stuck in an outdated mindset, clinging to 20th century solutions for 21st century problems.
And that's a dangerous place to be.
Yeah.
Because the climate crisis doesn't care about political ideologies or partisan bickering.
Right.
It's a global threat that demands a global response.
So where does this leave us? If our leaders aren't taking the climate crisis seriously, what can we do as individuals?
Well, we can't afford to wait for our leaders to catch up. We need to take action ourselves, both in our personal lives and through collective efforts.
Okay, so what are some concrete steps we can take?
We can start by reducing our own carbon footprints. This means making changes to our lifestyles, like driving less, consuming less energy, and choosing sustainable products.
And we can support organizations and businesses that are working to address climate change.
Absolutely. And perhaps most importantly, we can use our voices to demand action from our elected officials, from our employers, from the companies we do business with.
It can feel daunting, this idea of taking on such a massive global challenge, but we can't afford to give up hope.
Oh.
We have to keep pushing for change, keep demanding action, and keep believing that a better future is possible.
It's interesting, isn't it? Despite their vastly different viewpoints, both Trump and Slotkin invoke this idea of American exceptionalism.
Right, that notion that America has a unique role to play in the world, a special destiny to fulfill.
For Trump, it's about restoring American greatness, reclaiming a position of dominance on the world stage.
Right.
For Slotkin, it's about leveraging American leadership to promote democracy, human rights, and global cooperation.
But both seem to be appealing to this shared belief in America's exceptional nature.
Right.
Even if they define that exceptionalism in different ways.
Yeah.
And it's a belief that's deeply embedded in American culture,
Mm-hmm.
in our history, in our national mythology.
But it's also a belief that can be problematic, as it can lead to a sense of entitlement, of superiority, even of arrogance.
It can blind us to our own shortcomings,
Yeah.
to our own history of injustice and exploitation.
Right.
And it can make it difficult to engage in meaningful dialogue and cooperation with other nations who might view this exceptionalism as a form of hubris.
So how do we reconcile this belief in American exceptionalism with the realities of a complex, interconnected world?
It's a tough question. It seems like it starts with recognizing that exceptionalism isn't a birthright, it's an aspiration.
Yeah.
It's not about where we've been, it's about where we're going.
It's about living up to our ideals, about striving to be a force for good in the world. It's about understanding that true greatness lies not in dominance or isolation,
Right.
but in collaboration and partnership.
In working with other nations to address shared challenges and build a more just and sustainable future for all.
Trump's announcement of a new government department headed by Elon Musk,
Oh, wow.
focused on efficiency, really caught my attention. What are your thoughts on that?
It's definitely a head-scratcher.
Right.
On the one hand, there's no doubt that government bureaucracy can be slow-moving and inefficient.
Right.
And Musk is known for his innovative thinking and his ability to get things done, shake things up.
But on the other hand, Musk has no experience in government, and his track record is, let's say, a bit uneven.
Right. He's great at generating headlines and making bold pronouncements.
Yeah.
But some of those pronouncements, well, let's just say they haven't always materialized.
Remember his promise to colonize Mars by 2024?
Exactly. So it's hard to say whether this new department will be a success or whether it will simply add another layer of complexity and confusion to the federal government.
It'll be interesting to watch how this plays out.
Yeah.
And it raises a larger question about the role of technology and innovation in government.
Right.
Can tech entrepreneurs like Musk bring fresh perspectives and solutions to age-old problems?
Right.
Or are they more likely to disrupt and destabilize existing systems?
It's a question that's worth exploring. And it speaks to this larger debate about the appropriate role of government in a rapidly changing world. Should the government be a driver of innovation, or should it primarily focus on regulation and oversight? Should it embrace disruption, or should it prioritize stability and continuity?
These are complex issues with no easy answers, but they're issues that we need to be grappling with as we navigate the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century.
It's interesting how both speeches touched on national security,
Right.
but from such different angles.
Trump took a more traditional hawkish approach. His focus was on military strength, securing the border, combating terrorism. He highlighted his administration's efforts to build up the military strength and border security and defeat ISIS. He played to those fears of external threats, using very strong language and vivid imagery to paint a picture of a world full of dangers.
Slotkin, on the other hand, focused on the need for global cooperation and diplomacy. She argued that America's security is best served by working with allies and engaging in multilateral efforts. She even went so far as to criticize Trump's meeting with Putin, suggesting that it undermined American leadership and emboldened authoritarian regimes.
And she highlighted the importance of addressing the root causes of conflict.
Right.
Things like poverty, inequality, and climate change.
Right. It's a very different way of thinking about national security, one that recognizes the interconnectedness of the world and the need for a more holistic, multifaceted approach. It's not just about military might. It's about addressing the underlying conditions that give rise to conflict in the first place.
And it reflects a growing recognition that the traditional tools of military power are often insufficient to address the complex challenges of the 21st century.
So what does this mean for the future of American foreign policy? Will we continue to rely on military might in unilateral action, or will we embrace a more cooperative, diplomacy-focused approach?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the answer is likely to depend on a variety of factors, including the nature of the threats we face, the evolving global landscape, and the priorities of our elected leaders.
But one thing is clear, the old ways of doing things are no longer sufficient. We need to be more creative, more adaptable, and more willing to work with others to achieve our goals.
Both speeches touch on the issue of education, but in very different ways.
Trump focused on what he called indoctrination in schools, particularly around issues like gender identity and critical race theory. He condemned what he sees as a liberal agenda being pushed on children, vowing to protect traditional values and parental rights.
Right.
He used pretty inflammatory language and anecdotal evidence to stir up fear and resentment among his base.
Slotkin, on the other hand, emphasized the importance of investing in education. Preparing students for the jobs of the future and ensuring that all children have access to quality education regardless of their background.
She talked about equipping students with the skills and knowledge they need to succeed in a rapidly changing world, one that's increasingly driven by technology and globalization.
It's a very different vision for the role of education in society. For Trump, it's a battleground for cultural values, a place to instill traditional beliefs and resist what he sees as liberal indoctrination.
Right.
For Slotkin, it's a crucial investment in the future, a way to empower individuals and prepare them for the complexities of the 21st century.
So what does this mean for the future of American education?
Yeah.
Will we see a further politicization of our schools, with curricula and policies becoming increasingly aligned with partisan ideologies?
Right.
Or will we prioritize a more holistic approach, one focused on preparing students for the complex realities of the world they'll inherit.
These are important questions, and the answers will have a profound impact on the future of our nation. It's clear that education is a key battleground in the ongoing culture wars, and it's likely to remain so for years to come.
One thing that really struck me about both speeches was the emphasis on storytelling.
Right. Both Trump and Slotkin used personal anecdotes to try to connect with their audiences to put a human face on these complex issues.
Trump told stories about crime victims, families devastated by illegal immigration, American workers who have lost their jobs to foreign competition. Slotkin shared stories of everyday Americans struggling to make ends meet, families burdened by healthcare costs, young people striving to achieve their dreams.
And they both use these stories to evoke emotional responses, to create empathy and understanding, to bolster their arguments.
Yeah.
And it's a powerful technique because stories have this ability to connect with us on a deeper level than facts and figures alone.
They help us see the world through the eyes of others, to understand their experiences, to relate to their struggles.
But it's also important to be aware of how stories can be used and misused in political discourse.
Exactly. They can be selectively chosen, edited, and framed to fit a particular narrative.
Right.
They can be used to oversimplify complex issues, to demonize opponents, to manipulate emotions.
So it's crucial that we approach these stories with a critical eye. We need to consider the source, the context, and the potential biases involved.
We need to be discerning consumers of information able to distinguish between genuine storytelling and propaganda.
One thing that's becoming increasingly clear is how much technology is reshaping the political landscape.
Yeah.
Social media, artificial intelligence, data analytics, they're all having a profound impact on how we consume information, how we communicate, and how we engage in the political process.
And both Trump and Slotkin seem to be aware of this, even if they approach it in very different ways.
Trump has mastered the art of using social media to bypass traditional media outlets and connect directly with his base.
And he's not afraid to exploit the algorithms and the echo chambers of the online world to spread his message and attack his opponents. He's a master of using social media to control the narrative and shape public opinion.
Whereas Slotkin seems to be more focused on using technology to empower citizens,
Right.
to give them a voice in the political process and to hold their leaders accountable.
She's talked about the need for greater transparency in government, for open data initiatives, for using technology to make government more responsive to the needs of the people.
It'll be fascinating to see how technology continues to shape the political landscape in the years to come. Will it be a force for good, for greater democracy and participation? Or will it be used to manipulate and divide us even further?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
It's both exciting and terrifying to think about the possibilities.
It's a question we need to be asking ourselves as we navigate this increasingly digital world, and it's a question that will have a profound impact on the future of our democracy.
It's interesting how Trump's rhetoric has evolved over time. He's always been a showman,
Right.
a master of hyperbole and provocation.
But it seems like he's become even more willing to push the boundaries of acceptable discourse, to embrace conspiracy theories, and to demonize his opponents.
And this has had a corrosive effect on our political culture, hasn't it?
It has.
It's normalizing extremism and making it harder to have reasoned civil debate.
It's creating a climate of fear and distrust where people are more likely to retreat into their own echo chambers and dismiss opposing viewpoints as fake news or enemy propaganda.
And that's incredibly dangerous for democracy.
It is.
Because it undermines the shared understanding of reality and the willingness to compromise that are essential for a functioning society.
So how do we counter this trend towards extremism and division?
It's a tough question. It seems like it starts with recognizing the problem and calling it out when we see it.
Yeah.
We need to be willing to challenge misinformation, to push back against hate speech, and to hold our leaders accountable for their words and actions.
We also need to be willing to engage in respectful dialogue with those who hold different views,
Right.
even if we disagree with them.
And we need to support institutions that promote civil discourse and fact-based reporting places like universities, libraries, and independent media outlets.
It's a long and difficult process, but it's essential if we want to preserve our democracy and create a more just and equitable society.
Both speeches, despite their differences in approach, seem to tap into this deep sense of unease and anxiety that a lot of Americans are feeling right now.
It's like there's this underlying feeling that something is broken, that the old ways of doing things aren't working anymore, and that the future is uncertain.
Trump channels this anxiety into anger and resentment, blaming immigrants, liberals, foreign countries, anyone he perceives as a threat to his vision of America.
Right.
He promises to restore order, to bring back jobs, to make America strong again.
It's a message that resonates with those who feel like they've been left behind, who are looking for someone to blame for their struggles.
Slotkin, on the other hand, acknowledges the challenges but offers a more hopeful message.
Right.
She talks about resilience, about the power of collective action, about the importance of democratic values. It's a message that appeals to those who believe in the possibility of progress, who are willing to work together to create a better future.
It's a very different way of framing the anxieties of our time. It's less about blame and division, more about finding common ground and working towards solutions.
It reflects a deeper debate about the nature of American identity and the role of government in the 21st century. One thing that really stood out to me was Trump's announcement that he's reclaiming the Panama Canal.
Yes, that was a bold move, and one that's likely to have significant geopolitical and economic implications.
He framed it as a matter of national security and American pride, arguing that the canal was built by Americans for Americans, and that it should be under American control.
But it's a move that's bound to be controversial.
Yeah.
It raises questions about international law, respect for treaties, and the potential for escalating tensions with other countries.
Right.
It highlights Trump's America First approach to foreign policy, his willingness to act unilaterally and disregard international norms.
And it's likely to be seen by many as a provocative and destabilizing move that could further damage America's reputation on the world stage.
So what does this mean for the future of U.S.-Panama relations, and how will this impact global trade and shipping routes?
These are important questions, and it's too early to say for sure how things will play out. But it's clear that Trump's decision to reclaim the Panama Canal is a major development that will have far-reaching consequences.
One thing that's become increasingly clear is that the political divide in America isn't just about policy differences, it's about fundamental values.
It's about two very different visions of what America is, what it stands for, and what its role in the world should be.
Trump represents a more traditional, nationalistic, hierarchical vision of America.
He appeals to those who feel that America has lost its way, that it's been weakened by globalization, diversity, and cultural change.
He promises to restore America to a mythical past greatness, to make it strong and dominant again.
Slotkin, on the other hand, represents a more progressive, inclusive, globally minded vision of America.
She appeals to those who believe in the power of diversity, the importance of cooperation, and the need to address global challenges like climate change and inequality.
And this clash of values is playing out in every aspect of our political discourse, from debates about healthcare and immigration to arguments about education and foreign policy.
And it's a clash that's likely to continue for years to come, shaping the future of our nation and our world.
It's striking how both speeches, despite their differing viewpoints, completely overlook the issue of poverty.
You're right, it's a glaring omission.
Yeah.
Especially considering the millions of Americans struggling to make ends meet, even as the economy supposedly booms.
Trump boasts about his economic policies, claims they've lifted all boats.
Right.
But the reality is many are being left behind.
And while Slotkin talks about the need for a strong middle class, she doesn't really address the issue of poverty head-on. It's almost like poverty has become this invisible problem, something that's just accepted as a fact of life.
And that's dangerous, isn't it? Poverty has profound consequences for individuals, for families, for entire communities.
Absolutely. It leads to poor health outcomes, lower educational attainment, reduced economic mobility. It contributes to crime, social unrest, and a sense of hopelessness.
So what can be done to address the issue of poverty in America?
It's a complex problem that requires a multifaceted approach. It requires investments in education, job training, affordable housing, healthcare.
It also requires addressing systemic issues like discrimination, lack of access to capital, and the concentration of wealth and power.
And at its core, it requires a commitment to social justice, a recognition that everyone deserves a fair chance to succeed, regardless of their background or their circumstances.
Both speeches touched on healthcare, but again, from very different perspectives.
Trump boasted about his efforts to dismantle the Affordable Care Act, claiming he's lowered healthcare costs and increased choice.
Right.
But the reality is millions of Americans have lost their health insurance during his presidency, and healthcare costs continue to rise.
And while he talks about protecting those with pre-existing conditions, his actions have actually made it more difficult for them to get affordable coverage.
Slotkin, on the other hand, emphasized the importance of universal health care, arguing that everyone should have access to quality, affordable care regardless of their income or employment status. She spoke about the need to expand coverage, reduce costs, and improve the quality of care.
It's a fundamental difference in philosophy.
Yeah.
Trump favors a more market-based approach, while Slotkin believes that healthcare is a right, not a privilege.
And this is a debate that's likely to continue for years to come, with both sides deeply entrenched in their positions and the American people stuck in the middle.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers,
Sure.
but it's one that we as a nation need to address urgently because healthcare is fundamental to the well-being of our society.
One thing that's becoming increasingly clear is that the traditional media is losing its grip on the narrative.
Yeah, the rise of social media, the proliferation of online news sources, the decline of trust in traditional institutions, all of this has created a fragmented and often chaotic information landscape.
It's becoming increasingly difficult to discern fact from fiction,
Right.
to separate legitimate news from propaganda and misinformation.
And it's led to people retreating into echo chambers, consuming information that only confirms their existing beliefs.
And that's dangerous for democracy.
Right.
It undermines the shared understanding of reality and the willingness to engage in reasoned debate that are essential for a functioning society.
So how do we navigate this increasingly complex and challenging information landscape?
It requires a more critical approach to information consumption, doesn't it? We need to be aware of our own biases, to seek out multiple perspectives, and to be skeptical of information that simply confirms our existing beliefs.
We also need to support institutions that are committed to fact-based reporting and responsible journalism.
Absolutely.
And we need to be willing to engage in respectful dialogue with those who hold different views, even if we strongly disagree with them.
It's a challenging task, but it's essential if we want to preserve a healthy democracy and create a more informed and engaged citizenry.
It's interesting how both speeches, despite their different approaches, tap into this sense of nostalgia for a bygone era.
There's a longing for a simpler time, a time when America was supposedly more united, more prosperous, more respected on the world stage.
Trump's rhetoric is steeped in this kind of nostalgia. His constant refrain of making America great again and his promises to restore a mythical past greatness play directly into this sentiment.
Right.
He appeals to those who feel that America has lost its way, that has been weakened by globalization, diversity, and cultural change.
He offers a vision of a return to a simpler, more traditional, more homogeneous America.
Slotkin's nostalgia is a bit more nuanced. It's more focused on a time when America was more idealistic, more aspirational, more committed to its founding principles.
She talks about the need to reclaim the spirit of unity, of purpose, of progress that she believes characterized America's past.
But both seem to be recognizing this deep yearning for something that's been lost.
Yeah.
A sense that America has drifted from its moorings and needs to find its way back.
And nostalgia is a powerful force in politics.
Yeah.
It taps into these deep emotional needs and can be a powerful motivator.
But it can also be dangerous, right? It can lead to a romanticization of the past, a blindness to its complexities and injustices, and a resistance to change.
Absolutely. We need to approach nostalgia with a critical eye. Recognize both its allure and its potential pitfalls.
We need to acknowledge the very real concerns that fuel this sense of nostalgia, but also recognize that the past is not a place we can return to, nor should we want to.
Right.
The challenge is to find a way to honor our past, learn from its mistakes, and move forward together into a future that's just more equitable and more sustainable.
Both speeches touched on immigration, but as we've seen with other topics, their perspectives were very different.
Trump stuck to his hardline stance, painting a picture of America under siege from illegal immigrants, criminals, and terrorists.
He used inflammatory language and anecdotal evidence to stoke fear and resentment, blaming immigrants for a whole host of social ills, crime, drug trafficking, job losses, cultural decline.
He vowed to crack down on illegal immigration, to build a wall on the southern border, and to deport millions of undocumented immigrants.
Slotkin, on the other hand, took a much more nuanced and compassionate approach. She acknowledged the contributions of immigrants to American society and called for a more humane and functional immigration system.
She spoke about the need to address the root causes of migration, such as poverty and violence, and to create a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants who are already living and working in the United States.
It's a stark contrast in philosophies. Trump appeals to those who fear change and perceive immigrants as a threat, while Slotkin emphasizes the values of compassion, inclusion, and opportunity.
And this debate over immigration is likely to continue to be a defining issue in American politics, reflecting these deeper divisions over national identity, cultural values, and economic anxieties.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers, but it's one we need to address in a way that's both humane and responsible. It's become increasingly clear that the American people are deeply divided.
The political polarization we've seen in recent years seems to be getting worse,
Yeah.
with both sides retreating into their own echo chambers and demonizing the other.
And this division is being fueled by a number of factors, including economic inequality, cultural change, and the rise of social media, which often acts as an accelerant.
Trump has played a significant role in exacerbating this division, with his divisive rhetoric, his attacks on the media and his opponents, and his willingness to exploit cultural anxieties and racial resentments.
And while Slotkin calls for unity and a return to civility, it's not clear how we can bridge the deep chasm that has opened up between the two sides.
It's a challenge we need to address urgently, because a divided nation is a weak nation.
We need to find a way to have respectful dialogue, to listen to each other's concerns, and to find some common ground.
Otherwise, we risk further fragmentation, social unrest, and the erosion of our democratic institutions.
One thing that stood out to me was Trump's announcement of a new presidential commission on health led by Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Yeah, that was a surprising choice considering Kennedy's controversial views on vaccines and other public health issues.
He's a well-known vaccine skeptic, and his appointment has raised concerns among public health experts and advocates.
It's seen by many as a sign of Trump's willingness to cater to his base, even if it means undermining scientific consensus and potentially putting public health at risk.
It'll be interesting to see what comes out of this commission and whether it has any real impact on health policy.
But it's clear that Trump's choice of Kennedy to lead this commission is a signal that he's not afraid to court controversy and challenge established norms.
You know, it's interesting how both speeches, despite their different approaches, seem to be grappling with the challenges of globalization.
Right, the world is becoming increasingly interconnected with trade, technology, and culture, flowing across borders more freely than ever before.
And this has created both opportunities and challenges for America.
Trump's response to globalization has been to retreat inward, embrace protectionism and nationalism, and demonize foreign countries and immigrants. He sees globalization as a threat to American jobs, American culture, and American sovereignty.
Whereas Slotkin sees globalization as an opportunity to engage with the world, build alliances, and address global challenges like climate change and poverty.
She believes that America's best interests are served by working with other nations, not against them.
It's a fundamental difference in perspective. It reflects deeper divisions over America's role in the world and its future direction. And this debate over globalization is likely to continue shaping American politics for years to come.
One thing that's become increasingly clear is that the American dream is under strain.
That idea that anyone can succeed through hard work and determination is being challenged by rising inequalities, stagnant wages, and the increasing cost of living.
Yeah.
It's no longer a guarantee, and for many, it feels out of reach.
Trump acknowledges this unease, but blames it on bad trade deals, unfair competition from China, and the policies of previous administrations. He promises to bring back jobs, to renegotiate trade deals, to make America great again.
But his policies have often benefited the wealthy at the expense of the middle class and the poor.
Right.
Those who are already struggling are finding it even harder to get ahead.
Slotkin, on the other hand, talks about the need to create an economy that works for everyone, not just the wealthy few.
She emphasizes the importance of investing in education infrastructure and job training, and she calls for policies that promote fairness and opportunity for all.
It's a fundamental difference in vision, with Trump offering a nostalgic appeal to a bygone era of American dominance, while Slotkin focuses on creating a more equitable and sustainable future.
And this debate over the American dream is likely to be at the heart of American politics for years to come. It's a debate about who we are as a nation, what we value, and what kind of future we want to build.
Both speeches also touched on the issue of climate change, but again from very different perspectives.
Trump largely ignored it, dismissing it as a hoax or a conspiracy theory.
He's rolled back environmental regulations withdrawn from the Paris Agreement and promoted fossil fuels over renewable energy sources.
Slotkin, on the other hand, acknowledged the urgency of the climate crisis and called for bold action to address it.
She spoke about the need to transition to a clean energy economy, invest in renewable energy sources, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
It's a stark contrast in approaches. Trump seems to be prioritizing short-term economic gains over long-term environmental sustainability.
Yeah.
While Slotkin recognizes the existential threat posed by climate change and is calling for urgent action.
And it's an issue that's only going to become more pressing in the years to come as the impacts of climate change become more severe and the costs of inaction continue to rise.
Absolutely.
Listening to both speeches, it struck me how both, despite their different approaches, seem to be tapping into this deep sense of uncertainty and anxiety that many Americans are feeling about the future.
Yeah, there's this feeling that the world is changing in ways we don't fully understand,
Right.
that the old rules no longer apply, and that the future is unpredictable and potentially dangerous.
It's unsettling.
Trump's response is to channel this anxiety into fear and resentment, blaming immigrants, foreigners, and liberals for America's problems. He offers simple solutions: build walls, ban Muslims, withdraw from international agreements. It's a message that appeals to those who are looking for someone to blame, who are longing for a return to a simpler, more certain time.
Slotkin, on the other hand, acknowledges the challenges, but offers a very different message, one of hope, resilience, and a belief in the power of collective action. She doesn't shy away from the difficulties, but suggests that we can overcome them by working together, by embracing change and innovation, by reaffirming our commitment to democratic values.
It's a fundamentally different way of framing the anxieties of our time. It's not about retreating into fear and isolation. It's about finding common ground and working together to build a better future.
And it speaks to this deeper debate about the very nature of American identity and the role of government in this rapidly changing 21st century. Who are we as a nation? What do we stand for? And what kind of future do we want to create?
Those are big questions, and they're not easy to answer, but they're questions that we need to be asking ourselves individually and collectively.
Okay, back to Trump's jaw-dropping announcement. He's reclaiming the Panama Canal.
It was a stunning declaration, and one that's certain to have major repercussions on the global stage.
Right.
He presented it as a matter of national security and American pride. His argument was that the canal was built by Americans for Americans and that it rightfully belongs under American control.
But as we discussed earlier, it's a highly controversial move that raises all sorts of questions about international law, respect for treaties, and the potential for escalating tensions with other countries, especially in Latin America.
It's a move that could backfire spectacularly. It could damage relationships with key allies, undermine America's credibility on the world stage, and potentially even lead to economic sanctions or military conflict.
It's a huge gamble.
It is. And it speaks to this larger trend we've been discussing, this shift towards a more volatile and unpredictable global landscape.
Right.
The old rules are breaking down and new power dynamics are emerging. It's a time of both great opportunity and great peril.
It's a lot to process.
Yeah.
And it's a stark reminder that we can't afford to be passive observers in this rapidly changing world. We need to be engaged, informed, and active citizens if we want to have a say in shaping the future.
Absolutely. The choices we make today, both individually and collectively, will have a profound impact on the world we leave to future generations.
Well, this deep dive has been quite a journey. We've covered so much ground, from the economy and immigration to national security, social issues, and the future of democracy itself. And we've seen how two very different leaders can frame the same issues in such contrasting ways.
It's a reminder that there's no single truth, no easy answers, and that we need to be constantly questioning, learning, and engaging with different perspectives.
It's also a reminder that we all have a role to play in shaping the future, whether it's through voting activism or simply having thoughtful conversations with our friends and family. We can all make a difference.
So what stands out to you from all of this? What are you going to be thinking about as you go about your day?
What strikes me most is the fragility of democracy. It's easy to take our freedoms for granted, but as we've seen, they can be eroded or even destroyed if we're not vigilant and actively engaged in protecting them.
It's a powerful reminder that democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires active participation, engagement, and a willingness to defend our rights and values.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking.
And we encourage you to continue exploring these issues, engaging in civil discourse, and working towards a more just and equitable world.
Until next time, keep diving deep.